So before we get started on this last piece of Rolling Stone's top 100, actually top 500, but Kelly and I are just giving our thoughts on the top 100 albums of all time, or at least this more recent version of it. There's two things that I need to clarify. The first is in our last installment, I made a mistake. I said that Prince had a song called and the song is actually called We Can. So I apologize. Also, for the drink cucks out there, it's that time of year. This is pumpkin cider. I'm all pumpkin everything right about now.
That's great. That's just great. Now, at least to get to, well, we'll see how it goes. At least I have some edits I know at the beginning. So, yeah. It was uh, a lesser error than mine, which was I had gotten confused because there was the history of the Bonzos and the Beast of the Bonzos. And the history of the Bonzos was actually a UK release. That's the album I have. That's the album I was promoting. It's a double album and all that. Beast of the Bonzos has, I think, almost track for track. They obviously don't have everything that's on the two albums, but everything is on History of the Bonzos, on Beast of the Bonzos. There's one song, I think, that's on Beast of the Bonzos that's not on the double album set. So I included a little drop in at that part of the conversation to clarify. So it's History of the Bonzos that I felt should have been on the list. Beast of the Bonzos, fine album, but history is the way to go. So. All right. So those are our mistakes. Now let's talk about Rolling Stones. We'll go ahead and see how this works out. See if I don't steal too many from you this week or this round here. It's our third and final round, and we'll start with number 33. Let you take off with that, sir.
Hey, I was gonna say you're already stealing the very first one.
Yeah, I was. I was going to give the title. I was like, well, no, that would be Mike's job. So,
So this is gonna be Amy Winehouse, Back in Black. This is that white girl soul that spun off of Dusty Springfield that we mentioned in the last list. So I don't know that much about Amy Winehouse. The songs that I've heard I liked. Um, Rehab is the song that I probably know best from her. And it's only because of a funny story where my dad driving one of his ex-wives to rehab put that song on in the car. So they
helpful.
thought it was funny though too, so it's cool. You, sir?
Um, I have when I drive people to rehab, I tend to have the sound system off, if that was your question. Uh, I'm going to plead the fifth on Amy. I don't know if I've heard a single one of her songs all the way through. Um, so I'm not in a position to challenge whether this should or should not be on the list. Actually, there's a disturbing number of fifths that I need to take in the top 33, but well, we'll see how it goes. But I don't have to here because Mike can tune me in a little bit. And there were some other things here. We talked about the album cover, which I didn't think was like super bad, but Mike doesn't like at all. But I'd say Lemonade. This is kind of when a little rocky time for Beyonce, and so put a album out, kind of airing some of those grievances and that type of stuff. I was a little surprised. There's foreshadowings of her future country work um, with Daddy Lessons, and then also Jack White and her do something together, which is not the immediate pairing I would have thought of. Good album, as we mentioned before on Beyonce. Neither one of us are like super steeped in all things Beyonce, but uh, I'm in the top 50. I'm not posing it in this spot. I don't feel strongly it's over or underrated there, so I'll let this one ride. You?
Yeah, I mean with Beyonce stuff, I don't argue that she's on the list. I don't know what albums to put where. I will say this, as Kelly alluded to, this was an album of her very publicly talking about her marital issues with Jay-Z that they were going through at the time. That definitely worked out way better for them than it did for Will Smith. So. At least I have to assume they handled it better. Again, I didn't listen to this, so I have nothing to compare it to. I don't like the album cover though. It is a still from one of the music videos from the album, so I don't love that. But other than that, I have no issue with her being on the list. I'm not a Beyonce fan, so I couldn't tell you what albums should be the ones on the list though.
And you've really never gotten over she kind of stole your look from the 70s on this cover. So
Yeah.
that's a shame.
So I was trying to think of where to start for this. So again, going back to not a jazz guy, which we've mentioned a couple of times, there are a few albums that could be classified as jazz that I really like, but I wouldn't say I'm a strong jazz person. Miles Davis, of course, I know who he is. I'm familiar with this album, so it seems like a no-brainer that this would be one of the ones on the list, but I'd be lying if I said I was knowledgeable enough to say anything about it.
I am also going to stipulate that this belongs on the list and belongs about in this general location. And it's nice to see the diversity of kind of, well, there's some diversity. There's also a striking lack of diversity that we'll start to talk about shortly as well on this list. Jimi Hendrix, second or third appearance in the top 100 for us here. Are you experienced? Um, Purple Haze was on this one here. The album of its time. It definitely had the feel of that kind of 60s stuff going on. There aren't arguably one of the greatest guitarists ever, solid band overall. Um, I'm supportive. I will not challenge Rolling Stone on that ranking for Are You Experienced?
Yeah, this is actually so we mentioned all three proper Jimi Hendrix studio records that were released while he was alive are on here. He didn't have a huge catalog. There was a lot of unreleased stuff that came out posthumously, and there was also a authorized compilation record which had some extra stuff on there that he did. But all three proper studio albums are represented here. This is my favorite of them. Purple Haze, as Kelly said, but Manic Depression, which is probably one of my favorites, as well as his version of Hey Joe, which it's such a famous cover that I think a lot of people don't even know it's a cover. They just associate it as his song at this point. So this is the one that I would choose if I was making the list.
Ah, this is where the lack of diversity begins. Be the last, so that'll be the last time we talk about this group. So if you want to get most of it out now, this time, feel free, sir. Go ahead.
So Kelly stole my number.
I didn't,
Um,
I didn't say anything about it. I did a little intro for you.
for those keeping the Kelly Steele's albums count. No, no, I don't like the Beatles. I understand that this is like their most successful album, I believe. But I don't like the Beatles. So no.
Fair enough. Happiness is a warm gun. That's pretty good. This was a lot of, you had back in the USSR and all that as well. So um, I am willing to begrudgingly allow the Beatles to possibly have two in the top 100. Um, if they were going to have two in the top 100, and I'm not saying in the top 29, I'm just saying in the top 100. I'd say this would be one of two that I'm not going to have a big issue with. But it's just my gosh, they seem to be so loaded on the top part of this list. It seems unfair to a lot of other artists, but it's the way we go. Got a prediction what's going to happen on my rating for my opinion on D'Angelo Voodoo? I'll be taking the fifth. So,
Fifth, I wasn't sure.
oh,
So D'Angelo Voodoo. Um, so D'Angelo was part of the Soulquarians, which was kind of a loose collective of artists in the '90s who were a big part of the neo soul trend that was going on at that time. this is particularly spearheaded by him and Questlove from the Roots, where they were doing like R&B and soul music that had a little more grit and a little more edge to it. I don't typically listen to that kind of music, but D'Angelo I've always been a fan of. He's like a more R&B version of Prince. Um, this is a great album. He as we were saying with Jimi Hendrix, D'Angelo, not because he died, but has a very slim catalog. That's only three proper studio albums, also a live album, I think an EP of remixes or something like that, but there's not a lot. All three studio albums are on this list, just like Jimi Hendrix. This is not the one that I would put this high, not because it's not a good album or because I don't like it, but his first album, Brown Sugar, to me is better. And it's the one that really kicked off a trend in music that went pretty strong throughout the 90s. And, Kelly's favorite, Erica Badu, would fit into that as well. To a degree, Lauryn Hill would fit into that. So they really kind of kicked off a music trend that brought a lot of people, myself included, into some R&B albums that we never would have listened to other than that. So for me, Brown Sugar is a little bit more of an important album because that's what kind of started all this. Plus, it has a song on there called which is about killing your cheating spouse and the guy that she's cheating with. And it's a great song structure. I actually re-listened to it recently. It's a great strong song structure of him pleading with them, asking how they could do this to him. And as the song progresses, it finally ends with him asking why they're bleeding all over everything. So great song, great album. Again, this is a very good album, just not the one I would have put here. Just personal preference.
Yeah, I think covered on one of the Muppet albums too, if I recall correctly.
You got to hear Kermit's version of shit where he kills Miss Piggy.
All right. Except between the combinations of taking the fifth and stipulating, I'm gonna, like I said, a larger batch than I would have liked. Now, I'm certainly familiar in a general sense with Wu-Tang Clan. This is Enter the Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers. Um, I will stipulate that they're in the proper place on this list, but I'm not going to be able. I'd be bluffing to provide any meaningful insight on it. So once again, Mr. Polinsky, you'll need to carry the water on this one.
So this is another one Kelly stole. Um,
Shoot.
that Kelly steal counter is
Well,
high.
you see,
This episode,
it's like every time you bring up Erica Badu, I
it
hate.
just throws you off.
It's just I gotta start talking. Gotta try to resurrect myself. Shoot. Okay.
I love Wu-Tang Clan. I'm a huge, huge fan from literally from the beginning. There was a little mom and pop record store near me growing up, and there was a guy who worked there who also DJ'd on the side. He introduced me to their first single, Protect Your Neck, which they had independently pressed themselves. This was their first album following that. Protect Your Neck is on there, along with more mainstream songs that got some radio play. This was a really big album because rap music, because of the Chronic, had become much more melodic and smooth and with much deeper production, whereas this was very gritty and edgy in a way that rap music really wasn't around that time. Also, it was really important for East Coast rappers because so many people kind of embraced what Dr. Dre was doing, and that kind of became like an LA or West Coast sound, that more smooth, laid back kind of sound. Whereas this was kind of paranoid and edgy, distorted sounding. This became like what people thought of as East Coast rap music. But huge fan immediately since I was a kid. I've had the pleasure of crossing paths with some of the Wu-Tang Clan members over the years. Capadonna was a part of our wedding. He did a video for us for the saved dates on our wedding because if you're going to get married, having your wedding blessed by the Wu-Tang Clan because Wu-Tang is forever. So that's more important than any religious or civil ceremony.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do to maybe have a snippet of that in there. I'm not have to go back and check the archives, but believe that's still kicking around somewhere. All right. It's my turn. Back off, buddy. Let me cover this here.
Yeah, I
Um,
get.
Patti Smith horses. Um, so, Patti Smith is part poet, part punk, I guess would be. It's an interesting combination. Pretty great artist. A reinterpretation of Gloria, which is uh, pretty darn cool. Horse is another very good song of hers. I've, I am, I'm definitely not going to argue with this. I think they probably got this right, and they probably got it about in the right place. She was somewhat of in a pretty kind of male-dominated punk, slightly pre-new wave moment. There weren't a lot of people that kind of carved out the territory as well as she did. So she was of import and influence. My only mild irritation is her collaboration on, I believe it was Agents of Fortune with Blue Oyster Cult. Vera Gemini has never been one of my least favorite Blue Oyster Cult songs. But it also it's a little bit more of her kind of poetic side, I think, worked into there with a dose of not some of the strongest Blue Oyster Cult work as far as I was concerned musically. So mild grudge there, but certainly won't that grudge doesn't carry over. I can rise over that to kind of say super cool with this and well deserved in my opinion. Your thoughts?
Yeah, samesies with Kelly. Um, I agree this belongs on here. This placement feels about right to me. Carole King, Tapestry. Not a Carole King fan. I mentioned this when we talked about album covers, though. This, like the My Bloody Valentine cover, to me, sound looks exactly like this album sounds. When you put this on, and I've heard this album because it was a huge success, and so many people I know have this record. So I've not just heard the songs on the radio, I've heard this entire album. Um, Not my kind of music, but this is what it is. Like if you look at this, you can imagine exactly what this sounds like. It's a big record. It's a successful record. It doesn't surprise me that it's on here. The placement doesn't really surprise me. Would I put it on my list? Probably not. But I wouldn't argue with someone else who would, just given how big and influential the record was.
Yeah, I can't really add much. I tend to agree. This is cat lady music, so that's gonna be what you get. Um, Kind of the same thing too, in that definitely not my role in terms of what I like. So that would be my personal list. She wouldn't be anywhere close on this, but just to your point, it's sales and familiarity people have it and with it. Um, not gonna take Rolling Stone to task for that. Here's that band again, the Beatles, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band. This would be the other. I do think, it gets into a little bit. We talked about Dark Side of the Moon. It's like, you know, everybody says it's great because it's just that's what you're supposed to say. I do think there's a a richness to kind of what's done here. I also do think there may have been another group, and Mike may get into this in his discussion, that kind of prompted some of what you get on this album as they kind of were going back and forth that are not the Beatles. Um, but these would be, the White Album and this one are the two Beatles albums that I'd say, okay, you can have those in the top 100. I'm not going to grouse. To front load them all up here at the very top of the list, and we're not done yet, um, that's an issue for me. But as much as I'm irritated about a lot of what's going on here on this list with them and the Beatles, I'm not going to completely uh, complain about the general location of this album.
I will. This shouldn't be on here. The cover is an eyesore. It hurts just as much to listen to it. I don't like anything about this. Aleister Crowley is in the poorly put together construction paper early South Park style crowd. that's on there. Um, I have a fun Aleister Crowley story, which is when long after his death, obviously when his abbey burned down near Loch Ness, I contacted the owners, the landowners, and asked if I could have a piece of it. This is where he ran his sex drug cult right off of Loch Ness. I asked if I could have a piece of it sent to me. I was like, I hope that's not too weird. They're like, that is weird, but you're not even the first person to ask. So sure. I asked them, I completely forgot about this. Like 9 months went by and a package arrived from Scotland. And I was like, what the hell is this? So I put it on my table, brand new white table cover my wife had put on there, cut open the box, saw what looked like a piece of wood inside of it, wasn't sure, reached inside, yanked it out. Ash went flying across our dining room and just rained down black all over this white table cover, all over my wife. She had ash covering her as she stood there because she was watching what I would pull out of this box. And her first response was, "Please tell me that wasn't a person."
She comfortably sets a bar very low for you. Velvet Underground, and Nico. I love this album. Um, so I got into this in a weird way. When I was a kid, I loved going to museums. I loved art. I loved music too, but I was really, really into art. I was on a museum kick, and I was getting into like pop art and Andy Warhol and things like that. So I was like, oh, he did this album cover. Let me check it out. So I actually knew of this because of the Andy Warhol album cover before I knew anything about Velvet Underground or what their music sounded like. So that might be a weird way to get into it, but it's what had me check out the album. Instantly loved it. And of course, for anyone who doesn't know, the album cover is interactive, I guess you would say, because you can peel the banana on there. Your thoughts, sir? And what does it reveal when you peel the banana, Mike?
It is a pink banana, sir. I've been told that you could look into that and derive other meanings.
Yeah.
I don't know what that might be. But yeah, I have no problems with this on the list. I might even place it a little higher than this, but I love this album.
Yep, I would agree. It is at its, I wouldn't place it any lower. This is definitely the kind of thing you want to have as you're getting towards the top of the list. Always does still throw me on the album cover too that this is not an Andy Warhol album. This is a Velvet Underground album, but you're a
Yeah.
little hard pressed to discover that by just simply looking at the cover. Venus in for Heroin. Um, it's great stuff. Lou Reed and John Cale when they were getting along, all good stuff. So big fan as well. Need to double check where. Yeah, fifth. I do. I guess. I mean, I could almost stipulate because Mike has educated me on this album some over some of our past discussions, but I just feel it would be disingenuous for me to just use what I've learned from Mike to kind of say, well, I hear many people say, a lot of people are saying, so I'm going to take the fifth, but I certainly am not going to wouldn't challenge this.
Yeah, I mean, I like this album. I would argue that his second album was maybe a little bit better. Again, an artist who died young, similar to Jimi Hendrix. So he only made two albums while he was alive. There was some posthumous stuff released, but nowhere near the level of, say, like a Tupac or somebody like that, where there were, dozens of releases after his death. He just didn't record like that. So there's just not tons of stuff lying around. The only thing with this album, as far as it aging, of course, this was produced by Sean Combs or P. Diddy or Puff Daddy, as he would have been going by. Um, he is not the most beloved figure in music anymore. So his fingerprints sounds gross now are all over this album as a producer. The second album I think is technically better, but I could see it maybe not aging as well because you have a lot more involvement from Puff Daddy. as a rapper on multiple songs, as well as a prominent feature from R. Kelly, whose reputation is also not held up super well. So I suspect that's why this one's here and not the second album, which was actually more commercially successful and had his biggest hit, Hypnotize, on there.
Haven't seen a lot of Diddy stuff on this list, have we?
No, no, this is the closest I believe you get.
All right.
So Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. Uh, no. Kelly, your thoughts?
Um, I'll give you top 100. I will not give you top 25. Um, we kind of covered this the last time we talked about. So if you hadn't heard our comments on spring, I believe you're going to find that in chapter 2 of this 3 chapter type thing where we discuss Mr. Springsteen. Um, but Thunder Road and Born to Run are on this. Um, I mean, it's not bad. I just think the guy's so, as Mike talked about, so overhyped, and maybe not quite as authentic as one might think. Uh, like I said, I don't begrudge top 100, but I would. There's a lot of stuff behind this one that I put ahead of it. Let me just leave it that way.
Kelly, there is no Alice Cooper on this album,
Yeah,
and on this entire list of 500 albums,
yep,
and this album's at 21.
yeah, that's bad. Okay, Radiohead Kid A, released in 2000. This think we had the earlier album OK Computer, which marked kind of a beginning of kind of an entry into uh, less uh, formulaic music, standard music. This continues the trend kind of in a big way. You've got ambient, you've got kind of a little more of the techno stuff a little bit as well. And Pretty great album. Really surprised we're talking Radiohead twice on this list of top 100. And to your point, no Alice Cooper. But setting that aside, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna challenge top 50 placement. I kind of wonder, boy, it seems a pretty noble spot to be in there, but still pretty great album. So I'm not gonna grouse too much.
Yeah, I don't dislike Radiohead. And again, Clive Deemer's great. This was, OK Computer into this. This was them kind of leaving behind the indie rock thing and becoming more experimental, and that's cool. And it led to a lot of other bands being open to experimentation because they realized that they could still have commercially successful records and do that. So that's really cool. It's not really for me, and it is hard to back up things, especially now that we're talking top 20. It's really hard not to see or not see Alice Cooper on this list at all.
No.
Kendrick Lamar to Pimp a Butterfly. He doesn't like Drake. I don't know if you heard this.
Had no idea.
Yeah, not the biggest fan in the world of Drake. When he headlined the recent Super Bowl halftime, which was his second Super Bowl halftime appearance, because he made a guest appearance when Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg headlined the Super Bowl the previous year. So that was his second appearance. He used it to comment on the situation with Drake. So I like Kendrick Lamar. This is a little, and this is where I'm going to sound like an old man yelling at a cloud, I guess. This is a little bit kind of outside of my generation. So I do like Kendrick Lamar, but if I'm getting into an album that has, Dr. Dre production and that is skewing in that sort of direction, I'm an old man and I'm set in my ways. I'm just going to put on a Dr. Dre or Snoop Dogg record at that point.
And I'm going to take the fifth. Okay, so Bob Dylan, Highway 61 Revisited, um, Desolation Road, Like a Rolling Stone are on here. Um, this is him hitting his stride, I think, in early Dylan. There's a lot of Dylan, a lot of roads Dylan goes down as the years go by. This, I think, is kind of the hitting on all cylinders Dylan, whether it be on a little more on the folk side or then going electric gasp. But the this is kind of to me kind of what him starting to just kind of hit some of the high points of his creative work, and so supportive on multiple levels. The location I'm fine with.
I mean, I don't argue with this being on the list. For me, location gets tough at this point. We're talking top 20. There's just so many bands I love. So many things that aren't on here, Alice Cooper. So location gets a little tougher for me. I don't argue with Dylan being on the list or this album being on the list. But yeah, location's getting tough for me at this point. Hey, we talked about Kanye West. So this is an artist that isn't just, separating the art from the artist. That's a big part of it, but somebody who's really done, I'm gonna say everything you can do to destroy your public image. Um, to a degree where it almost feels like if he tomorrow just posts a video and was like, hey guys, I've just been kidding. This has all been a big performance art piece. I would accept that at this point because it seems almost intentional, the level of self-sabotage that he seems capable of. Um, when we talked about him previously, I mentioned that this is the album most people would point to as their favorite Kanye West album. For me, it's not. It's a really good album, and that's again feels really weird to say given who he's become in recent years. But this is a really good album. Personally, swap this out with 808s and Heartbreak, though.
So he didn't make it on this list because of the cover, as far as I'm concerned. That's
So
personal.
that's the censored cover. That's not the original cover.
Well, they should have just done something different because it's a frightening cover to me. I dislike it immensely. So, um, not much to add outside of since they're not going to get a mention on this list anywhere. Another, Alice is a huge miss on my part. Another, in my opinion, King Crimson, uh, in whichever incarnation you want to run with, um, also absent from, I believe, the 500, if I recall correctly,
Yeah, I
uh,
don't believe there was a King Crimson on here.
which is ridiculous. But that's sampled on here, so they snuck King Crimson snuck in at 17 as a sample. Way to go, Mr. Fripp. Hmm. Gosh, I think one of the problems I have with this is they have an extra number here. I'm gonna say I would have had this higher, much, much higher. Um, this is, an all-time favorite of mine. I think it is just, the Clash, have always been depicted as, well, they came up in the punk movement, which they did, same time as the Sex Pistols and all of that. But very rapidly, while there were elements of some of the driving music and some of the passion and the leanness and the rawness of the music, they also started going all over the place with different kind of influences and sounds and some like ska sometimes, and a cover or two there that was done almost straight in a straightforward way, like Brand New Cadillac. This is a great album. It's a double album that sold for the price of a single album because the Clash were all about giving the people music at an affordable price. Unlike Mr. Springsteen, as we talked about a little bit earlier, there's a genuineness that courses through the veins of Joe Strummer, certainly. So highly supportive of this being on a list. Personally believe it should have been in the single digits in terms of the rankings, but at least it's up there. So I support.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I agree with everything Kelly said. I haven't had Joe Strummer's saliva on me like Kelly, so I can't say that I'm a fan to the degree that he is. But obviously, I don't argue with this being on here, particularly this album from The Clash. We reviewed this, and I had already heard many of the songs off it, but just this is one of those albums that's really great to just sit and listen to the whole album. So I don't argue with it being on here. It's probably about right for me placement wise because I'm not quite as big a fan as Kelly. But yeah, this should be on here. It should be near the top of the list like this. Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. Public Enemy is really important because when early rap was more focused on being kind of dance and party music, and then you had the grittier stuff that Ice-T and NWA were doing, they really kind of injected a lot of political or at least socially conscious elements to it where they were talking about more important issues, kind of in the way the Clash would. I would say they were the rap version of the Clash, that it wasn't trying to sell you a specific idea, but more make you question authority in general, if that makes sense.
Yep, I think it does. Don't believe the hype is pretty great because I don't as you've gone through the list, you can see probably I'm not immersed in the world of rap, shall we say, but a little bit more familiar with Public Enemy, um, and so I think it's cool that it's the work's recognized. Uh, Not as familiar with the canon to know if this is the Public Enemy album that should be there, but I'm glad they're deserving. Glad that they're on the list, and I'm glad they're in the location on the list.
Yeah, this was the big one. It's kind of the safe choice too, but this was the big one for them.
Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street. Tumbling Dice, happy you're on here. This is, um, I think, sometimes on Stones albums, you can tell they're working to fill the album, kind of have enough tracks. This felt like it was pretty raw, pretty real, um, vintage Stones. I've always been a big fan of Happy. I didn't realize until the little write up that's included in the Stones list um, that Happy was actually everybody else was late, so it was just like Keith and a guy to play drums and and a horn, and they did Happy, and Happy's kind of always been one of my favorite Rolling Stones songs. So um, I'm not sure as I look across the Stones canon which one I'd put ahead of this. I think this is pretty solid representation here. We had to Let It Bleed a little bit earlier. That's pretty good as well. But I'd say this is darn close to the best Stones album. So yeah, I'm okay. You okay?
Yeah, for the most part, I would probably not put this ahead of Let It Bleed for me personally. But I mean, if it should probably be on this list, again, I'd probably swap those out. This might not be quite as high, so I'd swap them out and it'd go back a little further. I don't know that I put this ahead of London Calling. But this album, of course, is also famous because of the kind of the backstory and the lore around it. They were fighting with the British government over taxes and things like that. That's where the exile part of it is they were tax exiles at that time. So it's got a backstory and history to it, which I think always helps when you're into a band. Aretha Franklin, I never loved a man the way I love
See,
you.
you wait. because you're baiting me before you start to talk.
Now I am. I'm 100% baiting you now.
I haven't been baiting, have I?
No, not the last
You
few.
want a minute of dead air? Okay. I'll just sit there and wait.
Aretha Franklin, I never loved a man the way I love you. I'm just going to defer back to what I had said previously. I know Aretha Franklin belongs on this list. I'm not knowledgeable enough to say it's this album or a different album. That's for somebody who knows this music better than me to decide. I have no problem with her on the list. Is she going to be in my top, 15 or whatever for me personally? No. Should she be on a list like this? Yes. You, sir?
Yeah, not much different there. Person of my personal favorite kind of music and all that. She's not gonna kind of break through. But if we're kind of abstractly looking at a list of the top 500 greatest albums, how do you not have her on there? Certainly from impact and talent. So can't really find much to argue against it. So I haven't heard a lot from Michael Jackson, but we're gonna, here. So this was we did one other the Off the Wall album a little bit earlier, and now the one that Mike very accurately predicted was going to appear in the list in about this spot. Maybe I was maybe slightly surprised it's not top 10, but it's awful close. So he kind of gets into nitpicking at this point. Um, but pretty great, great album, and um, not meaning to kind of pick on it and continue to dwell on it, but you know, at this point, the plastic surgeries have not gone too far. So we're still okay. This is not the same. It's not the same guy as Off the Wall, but
Yeah, he
still
he looks a little more angular here.
a little more angular, but not um scary yet. So that's good. But
This is a
that's
guy you could still look in the eye.
yeah, you have to kind of yeah. Great stuff. I mean, I think this is a huge album, tons of impact. Um, things like the Thriller song itself, the big storyline video debuting on MTV, all the hype stuff around all that, all pretty cool. So you can't begrudge it. That it's a significant album.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge album. It's hard to argue with it being on this list. He was an incredibly talented person. I think the only reason this isn't top 10 is because of the accusations and different things that happened later in his life. I think otherwise this would probably be top 10. And I think this is them kind of playing it a little bit safer because they have to acknowledge that it should be on here. I mean, at different points, this has been the best selling album of all time. I know that kind of nowadays kind of goes back and forth between a couple different albums, this being one of them. But at points, this was the best selling album in history. So they can't not put it on here and ignore that this ever happened. But I think that's why we're only seeing two Michael Jackson entries. And it's not, it's high, but it's not top 10 for this one. The Beatles, Revolver. No. You, sir?
Um, Eleanor Rigby is a great song, but one great song does not put you at number 11 of the top 500 albums of all time. And enough with the Beatles. Jeez. But we're not
Yeah,
done.
it's too much. Even if you're a fan, I feel like you'd have to acknowledge this is oversaturation. And this is another one that honestly I don't like looking at the cover either.
No, cover's a rough one. Okay, I will stipulate that Lauryn Hill belongs in the top 10. I will not argue that whatsoever. Um, but that is the extent that I can offer. But I know Mike can say more. So, in a way of almost not stealing one, giving him one, I'm giving him my number 10. Speak, sir.
And so I don't argue with Lauren Hill being on this list. I don't argue with it. I mean, this is her only proper studio album. She released a live album that was like her testing out unfinished songs in front of a live audience that at the time at least was not well received as an album. But this is her only proper solo studio album. Personally, I think if you want to put Lauryn Hill on this list, not to disparage this album, but the score from her group, the Fugees, really should be what's on this list because that's the reason we know who Lauryn Hill is. This album wouldn't exist without that. The success of that album led directly to this. So the first Fugees album commercially did not fare well, and they were pretty much on the verge of falling into obscurity until the score came out. Bob Dylan, Blood on the Tracks. We're top 10 now. For me personally, Dylan's not going to make it on the top 10. Again, to stipulate though, should Dylan be on this list? Absolutely. Is he top 10 for me? No. You, sir?
So the write up talks a lot. I mean, this album's coming out. He's kind of fresh off a divorce, a lot of personal stuff going on, and so they say they kind of speak to a little bit of. There's a lot of pain on this album, but um, so you're familiar with the kind of the accordion closet doors. You know how those work, where you kind of pull them out. I've
Yeah.
always felt that Bob Dylan, if he was singing Happy Birthday, sounds like he's got his finger trapped. You've shut that door and his finger's gotten trapped in one of the cracks. And it seems like he's in pain. His voice sounds like he's in pain all the time. So I'm not really sure. I mean, lyrical content, I guess, on that. Tangled Up in Blue's pretty awesome song, though. But I certainly think, you know, if if you're looking for artists that deserve multiple albums, not every freaking album they ever made, but multiple albums on this list. Dylan's certainly a strong candidate, in my opinion. This album is a good candidate. Um, Maybe it's a little high. I don't think if it is a little high, it's off by a lot. I think it's in this neighborhood somewhere, but not a huge debate with them on that. Purple Rain, Prince. Mike obviously is of the two of us a much bigger Prince fan than I, although I like Prince. Um, I'm more familiar with Prince's more commercial work, like this one, than some of his other stuff. Uh, Big impactful album, certainly got him in part of the conversation. People were um, becoming a lot more interested in it. I found it interesting again. Another thing in the write up of this one that when Doves Cry came from, I guess during he was crossing paths with Bob Seger quite a bit. And Bob Seger who's a very Detroit rock kind of guy, had actually had some success with softer stuff. And so I don't think this is a tribute to Bob Seger beyond just going like, well, if that Seger guy can do it, let me do it my way, which is pretty amazing. Great stuff. Tremendous musician, super creative artist, very successful album. I'm not going to complain about its location. I think certainly you can make, like you mentioned, it gets really hard up at this level. So it's at towards the top of the list. It should be towards the top of the list. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Prince fan. I don't argue with him being on this list or near the top of the list. He would be near the top of the list for me. I don't know that I would go with Purple Rain. So this is definitely the safe choice out of Prince albums to kind of what Kelly alluded to. Commercially speaking, this is his biggest album by a substantial margin. It was also a tie-in with a movie that he starred in that was kind of loosely based on him, where he played a fictionalized version of himself. So there's a lot of, glossing over things and combining things, but it's also not to his credit. It's not like a lot of biopics that you see now where the artists are involved, where they're basically depicted as like superheroes or it's entirely fictional, like the Queen biopic was. which has, I mean, there's a band called Queen and they made those songs. That's about where the reality of that movie ended. So this is a little more, I wouldn't say it's a warts and all kind of thing, but it doesn't always portray him in the best light, which is surprising. My wife, not a Prince fan. I've been a Prince fan the whole time we've known each other. She only recently saw the movie Purple Rain, probably a couple years ago. She watched it without me. It was just on, and she'd always heard it was a great movie. Knows I'm a huge Prince fan, so she watched it, and she was kind of surprised that it doesn't always make him look like the good guy in the movie. And when Doves Cry kind of touches on that, I'm not a huge fan of those kind of 80s power ballads and things like that. When Doves Cry is a little bit different though, because again, it does have kind of a darker tone to it than some of the stuff of that time does. It again, that was probably his biggest commercial hit as a solo artist. Well, this was with his backing band, The Revolution, but as a Prince song, it was probably his biggest hit. This is definitely his biggest album. If you were to ask me what my favorite Prince album is, it's probably going to be Emancipation or Chaos and Disorder. But if you were to ask me what's a good Prince album to start with, it's going to be this album. It's the most accessible. You get some of the more sexually explicit stuff that he's known for. It's certainly not totally clean, but it's more accessible than a lot of his earlier stuff is. And it doesn't have the weird religious overtones that the later stuff prior to his death has. Fleetwood Mac rumors. Um, so Fleetwood Mac, if you don't count the Ninja Turtles, my first concert was Fleetwood Mac. It was actually a package tour. It was Fleetwood Mac and REO Speedwagon were the headliners, and then Pat Benatar and Orleans were the support acts on there. That was a time when uh, Stevie Nicks was not in Fleetwood Mac when I saw them, but it was my first concert, so I have kind of a soft spot for Fleetwood Mac. I do wonder sometimes though if I would have any interest in Fleetwood Mac had that not been my first concert and tied to that kind of nostalgia. This is not, this is very much that AOR radio rock kind of stuff, not necessarily what I'm into. It's also a huge departure from Fleetwood Mac themselves. If you listen to their first couple of albums, it's not like this. They made a big shift to more commercial sound and it paid off. This album is huge. So it's hard to argue with it being on this list. Is it top 10 for me? No, but I do have a lot of nostalgia for Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, I think it's, um, I'm not shocked to see it on the list when I don't have a huge argument against it. I think to a degree, it's the backstory, makes it better, and it's kind of in terms of the timing of this album and that Fleetwood Mac began as two couples. Both couples are now on a separation path as this is being recorded. And so you're starting to get some of that bubbling its way through on things like Go Your Own Way and all those types of things. Um, I've always been a of Fleetwood Mac. Lindsey Buckingham's always been um, kind of my preferred Macian of them. I do think as he kind of went pure solo, he got really bad haircut advice, at least on his first kind of go around. But absent that, um, I've kind of always preferred his stuff to everything else. I've never the Stevie Nicks stuff. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not my jam. And so I'm like, if I'm just not sure if everybody was getting along. I'm not sure if this one's exactly at the same spot. I also don't know if it's the same album, if they're all getting along. So not a huge, just when I do look at some of the things that we've talked about that are not ahead of this, I thought we go again to London Calling. But London Calling eats this album for breakfast. So, but that's just me. Nirvana, never mind. Another huge commercial hit. Another band with a pretty small discography. Um, while they're different, I think not since Keith Moon and John Entwistle has there been kind of a nicer pairing of a bass and drum players. The rhythm section for Nirvana is pretty solid stuff. They're kings of grunge, I guess. So you got to give some credit for that. So that's kind of an offshoot styling that um, Pac Northwest punk, whatever you want to call it. But it so got to give them some credit for that. Again, I won't begrudge this thing being in the top 100. Uh, London Calling's still better. So you can pretty much assume I would say that after every one of these albums for most of the rest of the way there. So, but that's kind of where I'm at.
So I like this album. I'm not a huge, so some people are gonna get mad. I'm not a big Nirvana fan overall. And I'm not trying to sound like a gatekeeper, like I knew before they were famous. I had a friend when I was in grade school whose parents let him order albums out of music magazines, like the mail order stuff, which I definitely was not doing as a kid. But his parents would put their credit card information on an order form and send it out in the mail and hope to get something back. So he got Nirvana's first album, Bleach, directly from the indie label Sub Pop before they were super well known. So I remember listening to Nirvana before they were on the radio or anything like that. Again, I'm not saying I'm super cool and ahead of trends or anything. Somebody else had the album and was playing it. I got to be honest with you, I didn't love it. So when this much, much more polished incarnation of the band came along with Dave Grohl on drums, he was just objectively so much better than the original drummer. It was a huge improvement in overall sound. This has a lot of great songs on it that I love. It also, for a while, I couldn't listen to anything off of this because Smells Like Teen Spirit was just run into the ground, just being played over and over on MTV and radio and everything, especially after Kurt Cobain's death. That's just all you heard from it. Nirvana is one of those cases where this was very successful, even when it came out. And then after Kurt Cobain's death, though, it just exploded in a way that it hadn't previously. So I think it's interesting as a kind of thought experiment to wonder how the band would have actually progressed and what would have happened over the years. We really don't know with short discographies like this, where bands only made a few albums before primary member like that died. At this point, I think Foo Fighters are a bigger band. I mean, they've certainly obviously had more longevity and released more music, but I would suspect they've sold more records at this point too. And Foo Fighters is fronted by Dave Grohl, the drummer from this album, and also features Pat Smear, who was the second guitarist who was added to Nirvana right after this. So it's, half of Nirvana went on to make a much more successful band that I think people far beyond just grunge are familiar with Foo Fighters more so than Nirvana. So I think it is kind of interesting. I think, Nirvana is such a huge, prominent figure to people my age. But I think for younger people, there's probably not as much knowledge of this anymore. And they would know Foo Fighters much better than Nirvana. I don't argue with this being on the list. I do argue with it being this high on the list, especially when, to Kelly's point, the Clash is farther behind this. Alice Cooper is nowhere on this list at all. So it's hard for me to say this is number six. The Beatles, Abbey Road. No, this shouldn't be on here. I'm sick of seeing the Beatles on here. Also, Red Hot Chili Peppers did this cover better.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not 100% sold on that position, but they did it different. Well, different, not different, however you want to say it. Um, this one, and for those not kind of steeped in, for the longest time, I assumed Let It Be. Well, that was the last album the Beatles did, um, because it was released last. But as it turns out, they had done originally Let It Be was going to be Get Back, and they had gone in and done the recording sessions for that and got most of the stuff together. And it was somewhat acrimonious in terms of that recording session. And then I think they had all started to decide, yeah, I think we're wrapping this up. We're not going to do it anymore. So Abbey Road, they went in and recorded, which is actually the last time they recorded together. And I think they were starting to chill out. 'Cause they're like, yeah, we're not going to be together much longer. So might as well have a go at it. So there's maybe a little stronger sense of partnership running through there. Something that was likely present at the beginning of the group that definitely went away. Um, I've never been sold on the second side of this song cycle thing a whole lot as being a whole much of anything in my opinion. Um, Maxwell Silver Hammers seems like a Dr. Demento song, and I don't mind it. I like Steve Martin's version of it in Sergeant Pepper, featuring Alice Cooper as father son, not represented on this list. Um, and but okay, I'd mentioned the two previous. I just don't think that this is it's their last album, but that doesn't earn it a right to be number five by any stretch of imagination. Stevie Wonder, Songs of the Key of Life. We've talked about Stevie a couple earlier uh, mentions he's had on this list. Uh, it was having a bit of a stronger message behind the music was good here. This was uh, quite the endeavor in that, much like the Clash. So I compare it to a degree to the Clash's Sandinista. Sandinista was a triple album set. This was a double album set, which included an EP. However, I think in Songs of the Key of Life, it was he had so much A-list stuff that he had to do that to fill it out. I really feel Sandinista could have been in the top, could have been right around London Calling if they had not had it been two albums or maybe one album instead of the three. There's a lot of stuff on Sandinista. There was probably some pruning to be involved. There's a lot of stuff on Songs of the Key of Life, but there's not a lot of pruning to be had. So not uncomfortable with this on the list. Where it's at on the list, I support.
Yeah, same. See, we're just tearing through this one.
Yeah, that's all right.
Joni Mitchell, Blue. I'm not a Joni Mitchell fan. I'm sorry for the people who are. Um, I know that she's a really important artist to a lot of people, so I wouldn't argue someone else putting them on her list. She wouldn't be on mine. She definitely wouldn't be number three on a list where there's again no Alice Cooper. We just need to stress that. So, your thoughts, sir?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna I'm gonna take the fifth, but on an uninformed basis, say this doesn't belong here either. And again, it's just none of her stuff has ever really spoken to me at all. So, um, so that I've got to fight against that. But I guess for the for what this is, which I don't like, if it's a great execution of it, good. But get it off my top 10 list. So finally, and Mike's gonna have good things to say. So, Pet Sounds has been established in Bog Panda lore that this is a favorite of Mike's. This album was also in one of my configurations for us doing all the various shows we do. It was one of the album covers I had back behind me, along with London Calling, along with several Alice Cooper albums that aren't mentioned here at all, as we've kind of pointed out. Um, this is great stuff. This was when I was talking about Sergeant Pepper earlier and the incorporation of things like the Barking Dogs on this album and all that, all became a bit of a cue to the Beatles to kind of say, "Oh yeah, well look what we do." Mike has mentioned previously that there became kind of a back and forth between the two. I think Brian Wilson uh, can whoop Paul McCartney and John Lennon's butt in songwriting um, with both pianos tied behind his back. Um, and Beatles certainly could do harmonies, but nothing Nothing can kind of compare to some of the stuff you get from the Beach Boys. So uh, I do not have an issue with this being in one of the very, very top slots.
Yeah, I mean this is one of my favorite albums of all time. I love the Beach Boys. This was a huge turning point. So, to what Kelly was saying, there was a kind of rivalry where the Beach Boys and the Beatles were both kind of looked at as novelty bands when they started. The Beach Boys because they did write sort of novelty pop radio songs about surfing and cars and girls and things like that. And they were really well respected because especially for their age, they were very accomplished musicians, but it was starting to kind of wear thin with critics. And the same thing with the Beatles. And they're just, everything in the world is great and we're in love and holding hands and everything is perfect. And that all just kind of started to wear thin with people. And other artists were starting to criticize them. Where's the kind of meat to this, beyond just, I guess there's people who liked the Beatles songwriting or for the Beach Boys, really good harmonies and really great instrumentation. So you started to see both bands kind of buckle down, and there was almost a rivalry of, pushing themselves further to outdo each other. Um, they, in my opinion, the Beatles never came anywhere near this level. And this is also kind of where you start to see the divide in the band. The Beach Boys is really two different bands. In the beginning, you had the band, and then Brian Wilson didn't love touring. So he started taking more and more of kind of a studio role, which the record company was cool with because he could start writing the next album while they were out touring the previous one. So in the record company's eyes, this is, a factory that was going to keep everything moving. And he didn't love going out on the road anyway. So if he wasn't going to be, this energetic part of the show, plus a lot of personal issues and drugs and different things. But this is where you kind of start to see the rift because the Beach Boys, the live band comes back from the road, and this is more or less done. This is basically just a Brian Wilson record where he plays a lot of instruments on here and used very high end session players who were very well known at the time to fill out the band. And the rest of the Beach Boys are essentially just singing backup harmonies on this record with, the occasional lead here and there. But most of this being done and Mike Love not loving it famously, which is where the album title comes from because he questioned, if anybody would really care or even hear all the little nuance to everything and what's the purpose of doing all this. He then later fought for songwriting credits on it and claimed that, he was an artistic driving force behind this. There's a great video. There's a YouTube series called Train Records where they talk about albums that not necessarily ended a band's career, but definitely derailed it to a certain point. Um, they get to that point with the Beach Boys, with their '90s output, and he mentions he's like, so Mike Love is the villain in the Beach Boys story. And he's like, and to give that perspective, the Beach Boys story has, drug dealers, abusive parents, evil managers who stole money from them, and Charles Manson. He's like, and Mike Love is the bad guy in this story. So just for perspective on that. But the only thing that concerns me about this placement is it's not number one. It should be number one or number two, but I have a feeling the other thing I would put at number one isn't on this list at all. So
Yep. And I mean, in the cover here kind of helps illustrate your point. Who's the only person not doing any work on this cover? Mike Love. He's standing back behind, looking a little irritated. Dun, da, da, da.
Marvin Gaye, what's going on is number one. So I don't argue with Marvin Gaye being on this list, and I definitely don't. If I was going to put any Marvin Gaye album on this list, it's this one. This is the Marvin Gaye album that I really like. I'm honestly not super familiar with much of his other catalog. I know he's very popular. Of course, I'm familiar with his hits. This is the Marvin Gaye album that I know, though. This is the one that I got into and really listened to. Is it my top album of all time? No, but I can't argue with it being on the list. You, sir?
Yeah, I mean, Um, I can't argue with it being on the list. I can't argue with it being in the conversation for number one. And there's a lot of power on this album, a lot of uh, some of the inspiration stuff that's kind of going on around the creation of this album is reflected in the work, and that's a big vote for a meaningful and important album. So I think it's there. I just kind of think if you kind of go track for track up against Pet Sounds, um, and that I think Pet Sounds comes out ahead. Um, you go track for track against London Calling, and I guess it'd have to be two tracks of London Calling to one gay Marvin Gaye track because they just outnumber them a little bit on the number of things that are on London Calling. But I'd also he might he might win, a couple of them, but I think there's just a lot of other stuff. I think there's some albums that kind of collectively would go far. Not that there's like weakness on this album. Sound kind of top to bottom, but I just think there's kind of a lot more going on with things like Pet Sounds. So, but there you go. So there is the top 100 albums that Rolling Stone said. Mike and I provided some corrections for them to take note of. I'm sure they will be revising the list based on this input. But I think the key thing we need to do now is offer our final uh, missed album for the list. And I will let you go first, sir. What was
So
not here?
obviously, obviously, it's crazy that there's no Alice Cooper or anything like that. It's crazy that there's no Cypress Hill. It is hard to pick, what would go top for me, especially if we're talking the top 30 kind of thing. I mean, obviously you have to put the Rust Belt on there. I'm just kidding. I would never ever shamelessly promote myself like that. Never. This is available right now. I would never do that.
Link in the
So
description.
yeah, that's obviously not what I'm promoting. But I would say I don't understand how Witchcraft from Coven is not on there. I When I was a kid, I saw this vinyl, and before I'd ever heard this album, Jinx Dawson, the singer, for whatever reason, and she's trying to look mean and everything in the corner there. I instantly had a crush on her. This might be the first crush I ever had on anybody was Jinx Dawson. And seeing this album cover as a kid, I actually don't think I heard the album until years later. I mean, I was still pretty young, but years after I saw it. And this image was just burned in my head, the album cover. I don't know if it comes up in the camera. I could always send a picture of it, but this is signed by Jinx, this copy of it. So over the years, I became friends with Jinx and of course told her that she was my first crush on something. And she actually designed one of the logos for my band Pagan. So we have a long history with Coven. So that should definitely be on there, especially because there's been in recent years, she's been doing shows, which is awesome to see her out at her age and still performing at such a really high level. She's been doing a lot of shows. I got to catch her in Philly not that long ago. It was awesome. Um, there's been a kind of reevaluation on a lot of these lists, particularly when it comes to like female rock singers. And not only is she often on the lists now where she wasn't before, and I think it was just because of some of the controversy over Coven when they first came out. They predate sort of Black Sabbath taking off and creating metal. Nobody would say that Coven was a metal band, but they definitely had a dark sound for like a mainstream rock band. A lot of dark lyrics and different things like that. So I think that kind of overshadowed the music for some people. And they had one big mainstream hit with a song called One Tin Soldier, which is not in any way indicative of what any of the rest of their music sounds like. In fact, it's not even really a Coven song. It's a song that Jinx was hired to sing on for a movie soundtrack, and she asked that it be credited to Coven to help propel the band forward. Um, but now a lot of lists that I'm seeing of like early kind of rock bands or proto metal bands, not only is she popping up on there, but a lot of lists of like best female rock singers. I see her near the top on. So it's kind of crazy that they're not on the list at all to me. But number one, always for me is going to be Psychotic as self-titled album.
Fair enough. Um, for me, uh, I kept as I went, so I went up through as Mike did as well. We went through all 500 albums. And we kind of, after we looked at them all, we said, we're going to be doing this show for the rest of our life if we go through all 500. So he said, well, we'll just do the top 100, and that'll maybe only be 3 shows. So that was, you're spared the maybe 15 shows you would have had if we had gone through all 500. Um, but I kept waiting. There were certain albums I was waiting to see. Who's next? London Calling were two of the top ones. Any Alice, you know. So I was found wanting on the Alice side, but the other one showed up. But there was one, and I kept going. Oh, okay, yeah. It wasn't in 500 through 400 because it's going to be in the next batch, and it was in the next batch, and it wasn't. So we get to top 100. I go, well, great. There was good recognition that this is one of the top 100 greatest albums of all time. And I got to the final 10, and I go, well, one of two things. Either they totally have missed this or it has shockingly gotten the recognition it deserves. It wasn't there. So, um, Captain Beefheart's Trout Mass Replica should be the number one album on this list. It Matt Goring, Simpsons creator. There's a nice YouTube video out there, kind of a biography of Captain Beefheart, and he steps through. He went to see Beefheart. He describes the crowd that goes see Beefheart. It was all very super interesting. But he talked about his experience on Trout Mass Replica because he heard, oh, you need to get this, so he got it, and he put it on, and he got done. And he goes, man, they're not even trying. This is a piece of garbage. And then he put it on again later, and said, oh, okay, I'm kind of starting to get it. And then on his third or fourth listen, he goes, this is possibly the greatest album of all time. And that's the exact arc I went through, almost beat for beat, too, where it was like, first time through, I wanted to like it. It seemed to be trendy to like him and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'll be kind of, I like Captain Beefheart. There was no way I was going to like Captain Beefheart after the first go round of Trauma's Replica. But after repeated listening, it is so um, there's a structure to it, but it's a very sinewy, slithering structure to it. But once you kind of decode it, um, it's pretty great. So definitely acquired taste, definitely one you wouldn't be able to rank anywhere without listening to it at least 3 times. And that's gonna be tough because you're gonna be done after the first listen and never want to hear it again. Um, but I was really disappointed that Trout Mass didn't make it on here somewhere. I could get that they couldn't put it where it belongs at number one, but they should have had it on here somewhere. So, um, and I did not. The fish head on Trout Mass Replica was not my first crush, and I don't have a signed copy of the fish head. So, and you'll know if Mike sent me a picture of his signed copy on whether you saw it in the show at the appropriate time. So, we'll see how that goes for his Coven
I have
album.
a weird amount of Coven stuff, like signed records and photos and all kinds of stuff from Coven. To a degree where even my wife was just like, okay, we can't just have a whole wall of Jinx in our house.
Seems fair. Seems like I think she has a point there. Excellent. Well, if you've made it through this one or any of the other ones, or somehow by a miracle, all 3 of them, thank you very much. We'd appreciate it if you would subscribe now that we're basically family since you've been with us this long. Subscribe to the Bog Panda YouTube channel. Hit that bell. You'll be notified when new stuff comes out. And let us know if there's something that was missing here that you felt should have been on the list, or if you felt there was some egregious ranking issue that we didn't appropriately address. I'd like to hear that as well. Anything else, sir?
No, no, I think that's it.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bog Panda.